out to be the host. Some similar to some of us. Some of us get an invite and end up crashing the party, taking over the party, making a statement that we are in the house. I don't think Jesus is home alone, because if some of us get an invite somewhere, we will let the world know that we are present. Not trying to show off, not trying to take over, but just trying to let you know that I am in the house. You can tell I'm in the house by the way that I move, by the way that I talk, by the way that I dress. You know that I am in the house. It's not my party, but I stopped in the party to crash the party. And you got to understand that Jesus will be the invited guest, but end up taking over the party. Here it is. Jesus gets an invite. You ought to tell your neighbor, he just gets an invite. Yes, he does. He gets an invite, and he goes over to the house. Oh, God, help me in here. He goes over to the house of Peter and Andrew. And the text says that Jesus gets word that Simon's wife's mother lay sick of a fever. Look at the text. The text did not refer to her as being Peter's mother-in-law. It says Simon's wife's mother. I don't know where we get all of this in-laws from, but they're not with the King James Version, because the King James Version does not allude to her deacon wife as being an in-law. It just simply says Simon's wife's mother. And every now and then it do us good to take a note from scriptures and stop adding so much stuff. And people begin to introduce you and say, this is my brother-in-law, this is my sister-in-law, this is my mother-in-law, this is my father-in-law. Listen, baby, they're either my brother, they are my sister, they are my father, or they are my mother. The text does not record Peter's mother-in-law. The text says Simon, which is Peter's wife's mother, she's laying sick of a fever. Some of y'all gonna get that next week. Yes, she is. Dr. Luke says that she has a high fever, which indicated that her suffering could turn for the worse. You must understand, as she suffers from this high fever, Deacon Elliott, she is dealing with the touch and go situation. If the temperature would rise, she could be on the edge of severe suffering. And here it is, we come to realize that Peter's wife's mother is laying sick with the fever. She's in the house. She's sick, can't get up, want to get up, but can't move because she's suffering with a high fever. What can I symbolically suggest here? In 2011, that the house is still infested with fevers. There are fevers that's running through our homes. There are fevers that are running through our churches. There are fevers that are running through our relationships. Our homes are threatened by fevers of all sorts. Fevers can show up in unresolved conflict. Fevers can show up in unforgiveness. Fevers can show up in bad attitudes. Fevers can show up when we lose sight of why we come to serve God. And since fevers have the potential to be in a house, in a relationship, or in a church, I stop by to tell somebody that the cure is not in Tylenol, it's not Bayer, it's not Excedrin, it's not in BC, but the presence of Jesus is the only cure for this fever. And I stop by to tell somebody that we need Jesus in our homes, because our homes are up and down, sometimes level to the ground. Our churches are sometimes up and down, almost level to the ground. Our relationships on the rocks depend upon what day it is. I stop by to prophetically declare we need Jesus in our midst. And here it is, we must understand now that these fevers are just not limited to the natural. There are so many many folk that are infested with fevers. They begin to look at somebody else get blessed and can't even rejoice with them. All of them getting a flashback on why it wasn't them. I wish I had some help in here. Selfishness is a fever and it runs throughout the neighborhood. You ought to tell your neighbor, you ought to check yourself. Come on, you ought to tell me, you ought to check yourself. Yeah, because if you're not careful, you will find yourself running a temperature higher than you need to be running. And here it is, Jesus stopped by the house off of an invite, gets word that Simon's wife's mother, she was there, she was running a fever, and the text said that Jesus, oh great God from Zion, he goes into Peter's wife's mother's room, and he gets personal with her. The text says that he begins to touch her, but he gets personal with her because Mark does not record that Jesus went into the room and said a word. Mark just records that Jesus went in the room and touched her. Now my question is, how can you get personal with somebody and you haven't even said nothing to them? You ought to tell your neighbor, hold on. Oh yeah, because you don't have to talk to somebody in order to be personal with them. Mark does not record any dialogue. He does not record any conversation. Mark says that Jesus went right to where Simon's wife's mother was, and he began to touch her. And I have discovered that you can become personal with a person and never ever say a word to them. The text says that Jesus got personal by touching her, and this was just not an ordinary touch, but Mark makes it clear that he took her by the hand, and the Greek word for took is a strong word, like he began to seize her hand. In other words, Jesus took her hand as if an invading general might take a city. Jesus took her hand as a dominant person might take control. And we know from the context that this touch, it was a tender touch, but Mark tells us that there was power in his grasp. And sometimes Jesus has to take us by the hand and lead us to where he needs to go. I stopped by to tell somebody his touch is tender, but yet and still I can sense the power of God in his touch. Mark repeatedly tells us in his gospel that when Jesus healed someone, Mark was a stickler for saying, and he lifted them up. In other words, Mark words for being lifted up is the same word he used to describe the resurrection. Could Mark be telling us that every miracle cure of every disease was a mere foretaste of the final healing we will receive when we are raised to new life? If Mark only wanted us to know that the healing occurred, he would not have to tell us that Jesus lifted her up. Oh, you got to understand, Peter's wife's mother, yeah, she was sick there with a high fever, and Jesus does not say a word. According to Mark, he goes in and he touches her by the hand, and he lifts her up, and Mark lets us know that immediately she was made whole. Now Matthew and Luke, they get their point across by just saying it with a few words, but Mark really wants us to look more closely here at what's happening. He seems to be adding an intermediate step between Jesus' touch and the actual cure. Notice now, this patient begins to rise, and we can see the regenerative power of God working in her life. Mark slows the action down so we can see life flowing back into her body. And I stop by to tell somebody that we've got to pay attention to the step. Tell your neighbor, pay attention to this. Oh yes, through the merits and meditations of Christ, we are not only justified or cured, we are actually life. As Christ comes into the leadership of the church and begins to heal it and lead it, the inevitable result is a new life among the disciples. And we think of the church